was so proud of
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is year 0. On today's episode of the podcast, I invite back Mr. Matthew Ho. For those of you who don't know, Matthew is a veteran of the Afghanistan War, and he is an anti-war activist. He's also getting a master's in divinity, in which he came up with presentations that related to his experiences from his time in war and the PTSD he had suffered, also called moral injury, that he had suffered in war, or from war, as the effects of war, I guess would be a better way of saying it. And I listened to a few of these that he had released as podcast episodes, and I was kind of taken aback. And since he's a friend of mine, I was like, dude, come on and talk about this stuff. I think it's really interesting what you have to say. So he came on, and we had a really good conversation. Not as long as the 2.5 hour one that we had previously on the podcast, but a very good conversation nonetheless. I don't know why I added a T to that, but I think you get where I'm going with this. Before I get into the podcast, I want to remind you that for all of your graphic design needs, get a hold of that commie bastard Ryan Bunting at ryanbunting.com. He is capitalizing on his communist ideology by creating excellent graphic designs for anybody who's in the market for them. So remember that commie fuck Ryan Bunting at ryanbunting.com. As always, thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Enjoy the podcast. Okay, I am here with one of my favorite people in the world, Mr. Matthew Ho. How are you doing, man?
Good, Tommy. You're too kind, man. It's good to see you.
Oh, I always love talking to you. My mom's always asking, when are you going to have Matthew on again? I love y'all's conversation. I was like, all right, well, we're going to have to get him back on. And then
it's my pleasure.
I ran into your I guess it was you're releasing lessons that you're doing for your PhD.
Yeah, it's a master's program. It's a master's of divinity. But yeah. As I go through the program, a lot of times the coursework I do will match up to be kind of a good thing for a podcast. So I've just been putting them out.
Yeah, no, I've enjoyed them. I actually listened to the first two of them. Well, not the first two. I think it was the second and the third. The one I listened to both of them like 3 times. And, and the one about losing your dog, that really touched me, because the year before last, I lost my dog, and that made last year really rough on me. And then I got this guy last year, and but the other dog had ridden with me in my truck for 3 years, and so it was like a piece of me was gone. And I damn near quit the podcast, because I was just like, I couldn't focus. I was just so distraught over it. And this one brought me some comfort in the process, but it was a really tough process. And still, my wife and I are always talking about, Pinky, and, how goofy he was, and how we had to get 2 dogs to replace that one big personality that he had, and this, that, and the other.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about Pinky. I'm glad you had your time with Pinky, though, And it's something like 70% of American households have pets. And we, as a society, still, for the most part, treat the loss of those animals as if it's just a piece of property, as if it's just, a piece of, maybe it's a well-cherished antique you got passed down to you from your grandmother or something like that. But that's really the level of, as a society, over the last several decades, we have placed on our animals and on losing our animal companions. And your story is no different than anybody else's. Everyone else goes through the same exact, and it doesn't end. What happens is eventually that grief and that pain will transition to warm and fond memories. It takes a long time, but there's always still going to be a pang. There's always going to be a kick, right? When you think about them, you miss them. And it is. My ex is going through this right now. She's got a couple of dogs that we had together, and one of them is reaching the end of her life, and so going through that whole process of taking, because that's another part of it too, that is so hard on people, is that we are the ones responsible oftentimes for bringing about the end of life, right? Many times we have to euthanize our animals. And so when you have this parent-child relationship with them, and already as human beings, we're not supposed to bury our children. That's why it's so difficult, right? But then to add into the mix, add in as well the emotional component, the guilt, if you will, of being the one who pulled the proverbial trigger, if you will, on your dog, your cat, your pig, your parakeet, whatever it is, your horse. Yeah, that makes it much more difficult. So yeah, I'm sure. And that's why it's just so strange as a society. We've not embraced this more. This idea that we're losing our animals, what a toll it takes on us. But that's starting to change. You're starting to see a lot more organizations pop up. A lot, people are becoming animal counselors or spiritual counselors who emphasize on animal bereavement. There's all kinds of things that are getting better, but it's still, it still is very difficult. I think a lot of people feel very alone when they go through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a really strange, I don't know, strange, but it was really like kind of like out of the blue. It's funny because he would dance with my wife. We would turn music on and he would get up on his hind legs and dance with her. And so all the night before, we're up like till 2:30 in the morning drinking. They're dancing together and having a good time. And the next morning, like every other Sunday morning, I let him out. We have a sliding glass door in our bedroom. I let him out and I laid back down. I was like, he'll come get me in 15 minutes like he always does, because he wants me to go get him some treats and I'll get my coffee. And he never came back and got me. And it was like 2 hours later, I woke up and I was like, where the hell's my dog? But I feel like that is a good kind of transition into why I got you here, because your other episode that I listened to so many times was about, moral injury, and PTSD, and being thanked for your service. And this guy's just going to chew on me until he
I love
gets
it. And
tired of it.
The people who are listening to this podcast can't see, but Tommy's dog Boogie is just all over him, all over his. Oh, it's great. I've got a big smile on my face watching this happen on the Zoom screen across from me.
This happens every episode, and I'm always trying to okay, let me just keep focused, and it never works. But what was I? Oh yeah. So you were talking about moral injury, and especially, how veterans feel when they're being thanked for their service. And I know one part of the rehab is the adoption of dogs and pets, for that, to cure that isolationism, I guess, and to give you that companionship even when you feel like you should be alone and feel like you should be isolated. So can you talk to us a little bit about how animals have helped you in your process?
Yeah, the dogs especially, but people find comfort and companionship in all types of animals. But I'll speak to dogs specifically because that's what I know best. And that's, I've had, I don't know how many dogs in my life, 10, 11, 12. I don't know. I have to count them, I guess. But, I think when you're dealing with that moral injury, you're dealing with the PTSD, maybe you're dealing with traumatic brain injury, you're dealing with some other types of issues, disabilities. The dogs have very practical uses. The dogs can help in a lot of ways. Many people know these dogs can be highly trained. They can help with seizures. They can do things. If you are having a nightmare, right, the dog can recognize the nightmare and wake you up. If you have mobility issues, the dog, of course, can help with your mobility. For people who are dealing with anxiety, the dog often provides that comfort, that blanket-like quality, right? That helps people get through their anxiety. People, guys and gals that tend to isolate, the dogs can help get them out into crowds. The dogs can help get them out into stores. The dogs can help get them places. So the dogs function in a lot of ways for specific therapy reasons. And there are, again, as many different types of issues or problems you can identify. There's probably a dog that's been trained to assist with that type of problem. The dogs do a lot of other things though too. One of the things you have when you're dealing with these things coming home from war, to kind of oversimplify it, you go from, with PTSD, you go from working in your primate brain. If you understand, our brains evolved as reptilian to kind of mammalian to a primate type brain, right? With greater functioning. When you're in PTSD, when you have PTSD and you're constantly in that survival mode, you're basically in that reptilian brain. And with that, you have problems trusting. You have problems with intimacy. You have problems with your emotions. You have problems just being with people because you're always on guard, right? You're always hyper vigilant. You're always hyper aware. And that doesn't just mean you get startled by loud noises, or you're always checking your door at night to make sure it's locked. That filters into your relationships, whether it be with a significant other, whether it be with family, friends, coworkers, classmates, what have you. And what the dog does is, the dog is your entry level into getting that trust back in relationships, right? Your dog is that beginning step again for you to begin and love and trust again. You've got somebody who is, and this is why it's important for you to find people to find the right dog. If you have a dog that's going to be more difficult, the dog that's going to cause problems, a dog that's not well trained, it can cause issues for the veteran, or could cause issues for anybody who's looking for a dog to provide that kind of support. So that's why you got to have the right dog. And a lot of times the dogs do need to be trained to a degree. Some dogs don't, it's a matter of matching up the right dog with the right person. But what you find though, is that, like I said, it starts that process of allowing somebody to trust again, allowing someone to confide in an emotional manner, right? Be close with, rely upon, be responsible for. So you see that with the dogs. And then the other thing too is the dogs, the dogs provide so many benefits for those of us who are rock bottom, where you're not even showering anymore. You're slowly killing yourself. You're just waiting for the moment to come when you put the gun in your mouth. What a dog does is, a dog gives you a regimen, right? A dog gives you a schedule. Like you said, Pinky would wake you up, and then you'd lay there, he'd come back 15 minutes later, and then you'd be up and you get your coffee, right? And you've got to take the dog out. You got to take the dog for walks, so it helps for guys and gals that are really struggling. And this is what happens with PTSD and brain injury and moral injury. When you've been devastated with those things, the way you're living is really, it bottoms out. And so a dog can help you rebuild that as well. And then finally, the other thing I'll say about the dogs too, why with particularly for veterans, is a lot of us do have experience with dogs overseas. You'll see the dogs around. The dogs will come out, and they some of them are meant to find bombs. Others are meant to attack. But typically with American forces, whenever the dogs come out and they're with them, it's a huge morale boost. The guys love seeing the dogs. The guys love petting the dogs. Guys love saying hello to the dogs. It always brings, my second time in Iraq, I was with the dogs a lot. We worked with them quite a bit, and we had 3 in our regiment. And anywhere we went with those dogs, they just brought huge smiles to the Marines and the sailors and the soldiers' faces. They just did. So it's a way for, I think, for veterans to safely connect with the experiences of war in a positive manner, because they remember those warm feelings of being with the dogs. And so it's a way for to then, because that's one of the problems when you're dealing with when you're struggling with the memories of the war is, trying to get to a point where you can interrogate those memories, where you can deal with those memories, where you can look at those memories again, right? And not be traumatized, not be horrified by it all, but get to a point where you're able to manage those memories and live peaceably with them. Doesn't mean you're going to forget them, right? But it means that you can live peaceably with those memories. And to do that, I think a lot of times you need to have an entryway into something. Okay, what was a good and pleasant thing? What brought you joy while you were there? For a lot of guys, there wasn't a lot of that, or the tragedy, the horror of it, the how awful it was overweighs any joy. So maybe the dogs do that. So there's a lot to this that is really beneficial to veterans, as well as to, again, 70% of Americans own a pet.
Yeah, well, one of the things you had also said in your presentation was that you have to learn again that you're worthy of being loved.
Yes.
And I think a dog, because the unconditional love that a pet brings you is very important to that process, because they're not judging you for the things you've done. They don't have that moral relativism or the moral compass to judge you upon. They're just judging you based upon how you treat them and how you are around them. So I think that's an extremely important thing, was learning that it's a very easy way. Don't unplug that, please. That's a very easy way to learn that you are worthy of being loved again.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Particularly for those of us dealing with that moral injury, right? And for those of you who aren't familiar with moral injury is a clinical term, I guess, for guilt, shame, regret. This goes back forever, as long as written human history goes back. The Greeks talk about it, the Romans talk about it, Shakespeare writes about it. Think about Lady Macbeth, right? And the blood on her hands and the whole out damn spot, right? Think back to freshman, sophomore year in high school and how she's haunted by that murder and she can't get over it, right? That's what moral injury is. You've done something that transgresses your morality. Very simple. You could also be betrayed. There's other aspects of it. So you could be, say, you are raped in the military by a superior. That form of betrayal is a moral injury. Or say you get sent to war, right? And you find out the war is based on lies. That's a form of moral injury. But a lot of times what the moral injury is what you've personally have done or not done. So there's this whole process of trying to forgive yourself, which is very difficult, incredibly difficult. And yes, absolutely, the dogs or other companion animals can help you begin to love yourself again, which is a very difficult process. And, as well as too, and this applies to all types of people. I focus on veterans, right? Because that's what I know and that's what I do. But this can go for really anybody. So excuse me for being veteran specific. But yeah, that process, one of the things for men, of course, right, is we grow up in this society, this culture. We're supposed to be tough. We're not supposed to be weak. The idea of self-love is pretty much anathema to growing up as a young man in this country. It's just not something that we take on. And then if you go into the military, you are conditioned to be a team player, to take care of others. You are not to be a burden to others. You are to take care of them. You're not to be weak. And so when you're dealing them with these, with moral injury, PTSD, TBI, whatever the issues are, it's why it's so hard for men in particular to get help. And part of that is just that whole concept of self-love and self-compassion. I remember when I first started doing therapy and stuff and doing meditation, and the idea of self-compassion. I mean, Tommy, it would have been easier for me to walk through a wall than to practice self-compassion. It really was. That's where I was at. And it's really important, and it doesn't make you weaker, doesn't make you effeminate. If anything, what the studies show is if you have self-compassion, you actually can accomplish a lot more. you're going to be a much tougher dude if you have self-compassion and you're taking care of yourself than some guy who's neglecting his emotions, his mental well-being, his overall wellness, so it's the smart thing to do as well. But certainly, yeah, the dogs and other companion animals, that's a real good entryway into learning how to, one, forgive yourself, and then to love yourself again, if that's something you're struggling with.
Yeah, and that was the first thing I thought of whenever you brought up that point in your presentation. I was like, maybe that's why the dogs help, the veterans so much. I didn't even think about, the exposure to dogs overseas and the working with them and all that. Let's get into you were talking about 49, something like 49% of vets that have served overseas feel shame or guilt or just don't like being thanked for their service. So can you get into that part of the presentation a little bit?
Yeah, we've had, there's been studies that have been done, surveys, right, polls that have been done that show about half of the post 9/11 veterans. So none of those men and women haven't gone overseas to the wars. About half of them don't like the idea of being thanked for your service. That also goes hand in hand with about 70% of veterans, post 9/11 veterans, again, who feel that the Iraq and Afghan wars were a mistake. So a higher percentage of veterans than people who did not serve in the military feel that these 21st century wars have been a mistake, not worth it, however you want to describe it. And I think the closer I feel that you've been to the killing, the more I think, I really do believe that the greater participation in killing, the more the likelihood is that you're going to say, please don't thank me for my service. That it's going to be very uncomfortable, that it is going to be something that is going to make people squirm with their conscience. That's not to denigrate people who didn't see combat or whatever. Hey, we all do what fit where opportunity and fate and circumstance and luck and everything else put us. But that is kind of my understanding anecdotally, but we also see it too in a lot of studies that have been done, looking at the relationship between guilt, combat, and suicide. And we see in studies going back to 1991 that there is a clear association, correlation between combat, guilt, and suicide. 1991, the first study I'm aware of, the VA finds that the best predictor of suicide in combat veterans is combat-related guilt. And, study after study has more or less supported that. So that's one of these things that add into it, is that, guys are getting constantly thanked for a service. They're being told you're a hero. They're going to a hockey game or a baseball game, and they're being asked to stand up and be recognized, and the crowd applauds and everything. And, they've got on their mind that what I did over there was wrong. They may think themselves a murderer. They may be agonizing over something they didn't do or what they saw. So that dissonance that then occurs, right, Tommy, that dissonance that between what's in your head saying like, oh my God, I've again, this moral injury, I've betrayed my own moral foundations. And at the same time, society is just everywhere I turn, they're telling me I'm a hero and I'm the furthest thing from it. That dissonance causes real psychiatric difficulty. Right. And then so if you know anything about it, right, the amygdala kicks in, it starts pushing out all kinds of chemicals to try and isolate you from that dissonance. That develops depression, that develops anger. There's all kinds of things that go into this. But this notion of just everyone running around and thanking you for your service, it causes, I think, much more harm than it does good. And it's on a macro level, what it says about our nation, right, where we have this deification of the military, whereas there is this quasi-religious veneration of the military. I don't even know if I should use quasi, it pretty much is religious, where military officers are treated as clerics, and to thank you for your service is like a ritual obligation. I feel that if I've had people say to me, "Oh, I'm sorry, apologize for not thanking me for my service." As if, like, if you're Catholic, you go and you make the sign of the cross and you kind of give a little bow before you enter the pew, as if you forgot to do that when you're going to mass. That's what I feel it's like. And so you do see that a lot. And so, yeah, the numbers show that a lot of men and women, according to the most recent poll I know of was a couple of years ago, half of those surveyed said they don't like being thanked. And again, we're talking about 70% of post 9/11 veterans think these wars were a mistake. So, there's another part of it too, not to completely make it negative. A lot of men and women who join the military do it because they wanted to be of service. They felt it was a calling. They felt it was something that they could do. So they didn't join it to be thanked for their service. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. So it's just awkward for them to be thanked for something that they wanted to do. And so that's a part of it too. So it's not strictly negative. A lot of it, I think, goes to show the quality of the character of the people who do join. And that's what makes these wars, right, even more horrific, is that we're taking some really great people. We could, conditioning them through, scientific methods that have been developed over decades to become killers, and sending them halfway across the planet to kill people, and then just sending them home and not really addressing any of that, right? And you think about these young men and women who are signing up because they believe what they're doing is right. Imagine if they signed up for something that didn't involve killing them, right? What they could accomplish. It's all very tragic.
Yeah, and one of the points you had made was that you had talked to your psychiatrist, and they had asked you if you would feel better if you were to spend some time in prison. And I thought that was really revealing as to just, you always describe war as organized murder, and then just your awareness as to what you had done or been involved in over there, and the way that it was weighing on your conscience. You felt like you should be punished in some way, shape, or form.
That's correct, because that was what would have been fair, right? That's what would have been just. But no, hey, the benefits of being a veteran in this society are great. I just purchased a house, and I have to buy all kinds of appliances, right? So I get my 10% off at Lowe's. I go to a movie theater, I pay a different price than somebody who's not a veteran. I have all kinds of tax advantages because I'm a disabled veteran. There are all kinds of things that, the benefit of it is quite good. But what you would prefer is some recognition of what occurred and some justice. And I say that for myself. I don't think the average man or woman who went over there should be locked up. I mean, I think that's just my own personal view of it towards myself. What I do, of course, think that the generals and the politicians, I think they should be held accountable. And I think certainly if they were of a different nation and they did what they did, they would be at the war crimes tribunal. And, we hung Nazis for this type of thing. Yeah. Right. For invading countries, destroying countries, basically starting a genocide, all kinds of things. And yeah, this is the fact that rather than being held accountable, it's almost all men in terms of the generals and the admirals. And then, of course, there are female politicians who prospered as well. No, they're on boards of corporations. They teach at universities, right? They are hosted on CNN. Yeah, it's quite disgusting the way it works.
Well, yeah, and if you're part of the establishment, if you're part of the bigger foreign policy, focus of the United States, then you absolutely get rewarded. You don't have to look any further than Clapper, lying in front of Congress and then getting a job at CNN. Never was brought up and questioned about it, or faced any charges or anything like that. But then you look at a Mike Flynn, who faces charges because he goes against the establishment. He's the one, he was speaking out about the Obama administration funding ISIS and this, that, and the other. So there's this whole double standard there. It almost creates, it doesn't almost, it creates the incentive to go along, to get along, to just be part of the war machine. And then you have a situation, maybe not, the government may not be quite as totalitarian, quite as authoritarian as the Nazis were, but the incentive structure is the exact same, as to where they're incentivizing people to just follow orders, right? And this flows down all the way from the top Pentagon officials all the way down to the local police force. And so it creates this really perverse incentive structure, within society, which I think is a lot of the ails of the society that we see. It is just the way that the United States conducts itself domestically and abroad.
Oh, absolutely, Tommy. Gosh, you're so right in all this. There's so much to that. One, there's the golden handcuffs, right, where the system works so that once you get to a point where you've been within the government, the military, for whatever, the financial difficulties you're going to endure if you leave are tremendous, right? So I still hear this all the time. Man, I wish I could have done what you did when you resigned, and but I got 2 kids that are heading off to college soon. I mean, you hear that all the time. You hear, if I don't do it, then somebody else is going to do it, which is true. There's no shortage of people who are going to step into these roles, right? I saw you talk about law enforcement. I saw an advertisement on LinkedIn for Customs and Borders enforcement position. I don't know how those things work. I don't know why they're targeting me for a Customs and Borders, right? I mean, but you can see all the responses, and literally thousands of people saying, "Oh, wanting to do that job." There are always going to be people who are going to fill those jobs. And then, like you said, the abdication of responsibility because of the pyramid that exists, right? Because of the hierarchical nature of this, and that it's a illegitimate hierarchy in a lot of ways, right? I mean, it's not a democratically appointed hierarchy. It's appointed from the top down, any of these types of organizations. So there's always someone above you that you can say, well, it's above my pay grade, right? It's not my decision. And that goes, you can rise the ranks of being a police department. There's still a city council. There's still a mayor. There's still, right? I mean, there's always someone above you that you can push that type of responsibility onto and abdicate that, absolve yourself of the responsibility, wash your hands, a la Pontius Pilate, right? I mean, so it is, and I think you're absolutely right. The fact that there is no accountability in this country. You look along the lines. Look at Obama comes into office. I mean, you have these bankers that devastated the nation, right? The world. You have a Bush administration that launched these illegal wars, tortured people. Look at Guantanamo Bay, and nothing is done. And the same thing too, the Trump administration, the same thing occurs. Biden administration, Guantanamo Bay is still open. There are, there are 9 people in Guantanamo Bay who have been cleared to leave. One of them has been cleared to leave for over 10 years now. There are about 25 who've never been charged with anything. And then there's a handful, like 10, who actually do have charges against them. But these are, you've had over 800 innocent men be put into Guantanamo Bay, tortured, held indefinitely without, and it just goes on. And no one is ever held accountable for it, right? The only person who actually has ever been held accountable for any aspect of the torture program was John Kiriakou. And that's because he confirmed it and spoke about it, right? I mean, other than that, so it is. And of course, that's kind of an extreme example, but certainly, yeah, I think on all levels of society, there's a lack of accountability, a lack of personal and institutional accountability that can be readily sloughed off because hey, there's someone above me. I mean, in the hierarchy, I answer to someone. So it's very akin to, any of these other, any historical example you want to bring up where atrocity has occurred and people have been just, pointed to the person above them.
Yeah, for sure. And I just think, I just think that's a point that can't be overstated, because, people like you, honest men and women, go into the military thinking that they are, protecting freedoms and serving the country for the betterment of society, for the average individual. And then they find out, as Smedley Butler had, pointed out in his great book, War is a Racket. And they come to that conclusion the hard way, and they're completely devastated. I think last statistics I saw, I think last year when we spoke, it was 22 veteran suicides a day. And I think the last statistics I saw, it's up to 25 now.
It's well, it depends upon the you got to really look at the demographics. You got to look at the ages. The overall number for both active duty service members and veterans who are killed by suicide each year is 20 per day. But that is, I think where your number 25 is if you adjust that for the veteran population previously. Oh, okay. So one of the things that we've seen over these last 20, 30 years, right, when we had 15 million men and women in uniform during World War II, those folks are dying off. So that's how you can go from having 22 veteran suicides a day, or 22 veteran and soldier suicides a day, down to 20. But actually, we're seeing an increase because the overall veteran population has dropped, because a lot of these old timers have passed away. Right. So it's these numbers can, like statistics, right? There are lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? Yeah. I mean, so, right. I mean, anything you got to look at, but certainly the suicide numbers, how it tends to work is you see a high rate of suicide among the youngest veterans, and then it tends to plateau. And then when they reach their 50s and 60s and 70s, it tends to accelerate again. So right now we see a suicide rate among Iraq and Afghan veterans about 2 a day, which when you multiply that times 365, all but only 2 or 3 years did we have more killed in action in Iraq than that number. And of course, as everyone knows, right, suicides are often undercounted. If a person ODs, if a person crashes his car into a bridge abutment, whatever, you may not know. I just had a sailor of mine, one of my corpsmen, he OD'd back in January. Officially that's not a suicide, but if you talk to people who were close to him, it was a suicide. Right. So you have these numbers. You see it among the combat arms, among the infantry. The rates of suicide go as high as 14 times what their peers are. So young men and young men who were in infantry units in Afghanistan or Iraq, they come home and they have a 14-time greater chance of suicide than do young men their same age, right? I mean, so it's just really astounding. And then, of course, you see people think that this gets better over time. It doesn't. World War II veterans are still killing themselves at levels way higher than their peers are. Last study I know of that really zeroed in on World War II veterans was in 2010 out in California. And they found that World War II veterans were killing themselves at a rate 4 times higher than their civilian peers, right? I mean, so it's just absolutely, and that was the good war.
Yeah.
Right? Right. That was the good war. So it just goes to show when I say something, and I've gotten this from other people, war is organized murder, that's what a lot of people do believe. They believe it's organized murder. Those of us who've taken part in it.
Yeah, no. And it makes me wonder when you're talking about the demographics of suicide, in that World War II veterans are now killing themselves at such a high rate. It almost makes you wonder that if you ever really get over, the moral injury that you suffer, or if it's maybe like with cognitive decline in older age, it's more likely to affect you than it does maybe in the prime of your life or something like that.
I think one of the problems is these guys didn't have the resources that we have now. Yeah, people think that they all came home from World War II and everything was great, and that's just one of the biggest myths you could ever come up with. These guys suffered. First of all, 1 in 7 men who saw combat in World War II were discharged for psychiatric reasons from the U.S. military. 1 in 7. Right? I mean, and that is, and again, remember, the diagnosis of PTSD doesn't become a recognized diagnosis until 1980.
Were they calling it shell shock in World War II?
Or was
that a Vietnam thing?
They had a number of different names for it, but shell shock was that period. George Carlin does a great bit on this.
George Carlin does a great bit on everything, man.
Yeah,
he's
but
awesome.
if folks haven't heard it, Google, go on YouTube, look up George Carlin PTSD. He goes, he goes to the whole how they changed the name, right? To it goes from shell shock to battle fatigue, right? To then PTSD, and the whole way we desensitize our society to it by giving it this clinical term, right? Shell shock. It makes it sound, as Carlin says, it makes it sound like, holy shit, you don't want shell shock, right? That's sounds like what it is. So, but no, they had very little resources. They had, and the society just didn't want to hear about it. And so they drank together. That's one of the things with the American Legions, the VFW halls, those kinds of things. These guys got together and drank there because they understood, as a lot of people know, famously motorcycle groups started up because of World War II combat veterans. And what I've seen just in the last 10 years of doing my work, whenever I have a couple there, and they are, he was in World War II or Korea, invariably our conversation goes along the lines of something that the only person who knew what he was dealing with was his wife, and so the suffering that occurs and the stress it's put on a family, and you hear this from the children of World War II and Korean War veterans, what a difficult time it was growing up in a house like that. It's something that's always been around. It doesn't get better with age or with time. It can be managed, it can be dealt with, but it's something that you always have to work with. It's a lifelong chronic condition, this moral injury. There it is. And you hear guys who lost both legs, who suffered, awful burns, who went through all kinds of real physical trauma. And they will say, comparing the mental and emotional to the physical, that, losing the legs, having the burns, whatever, that was no problem compared to the physical, to the mental and to the emotional, and I can certainly say that too. Like the stuff I've been through, the guilt has been the worst of it by far.
Yeah. Well, and I know you had talked in the presentation about being aware, like when you feel it coming back, like being aware of your emotions and that shame and that guilt and it, confronting it before it takes over, completely. And do you find it to be easier for you to deal with since you're working with other veterans?
I think what the danger that happens is that you put off your own wellness, right? You working with other guys, you don't give yourself enough attention, you excuse yourself for not paying attention to yourself, you think that because what you're doing with those guys is somehow also helping you, that you tend to let your guard down. Also too, there's a danger of taking on what they're going through, right? You're listening to them, you take on what they're going through, that soaks in with you, it's on your shoulders, and it affects you. So yeah, no, I think I think that's the case with anyone, who's helping other people. You've got to be real careful about what you're doing for yourself.
Yeah, I didn't know if the seeing that there's other people that relate to what I have been through, if that is kind of cathartic in a way.
It is. It's very helpful because you don't feel alone. I mean, when I first started getting help for my stuff, in early 2012, one of the things that my girlfriend did at the time, I was living with her, she basically got me to sit me down and watch some video testimonials that Wounded Warrior Project had put out. And so you're watching these other, men and women talk about things that you were going through, so you see that and you're like, oh man, that's what I'm going through. Okay. This person, let's keep watching and see what this person did about it, because you hear it over and over again from these testimonials and it starts to click in. Okay. You can either ignore it or you can recognize that you're going through something that's very real, very significant, very serious, and you can do something about it. That's basically what it was for me too, when I had to decide whether I was going to do anything. I remember being so bad off. I was on the ground, the floor of my living room. And I remember thinking to myself, look, either put a gun in your mouth today and get it and end it, or do something about it. But you can't do this midway thing anymore. Right. So, seeing what other people are going through is very helpful, and that's why I do this. That's one of the reasons why I talk about this. I speak out about it because other people help me and other people still help me. As well too, I think a lot of people will say, when you're in, say, group therapy and you hear someone else say something that is exactly how you feel, all of a sudden you feel validated. All of a sudden you feel like you're in kinship with somebody. All of a sudden there's this relationship there that is just so helpful. I would go to these group therapy things with these older Vietnam vets, and we'd be completely different in every way except that we were veterans. And these guys would say something and it would just be like, wow, holy cow, that's exactly right. So that type of thing is very, very helpful. Absolutely.
Yeah. I listen to you talk about it, and and even when I've heard you talk about it on Scott Horton's show, and all I can think of are the people that sent people like you into war to be totally devastated and have their lives completely flipped upside down, just profit off of it. And that just drives me insane. That's like, to me, that is like the number one thing. The number one reason I'm anti-war is because I watch these people profit off of the misery of others and do so joyfully.
Oh yeah. And without regret, without thought, without hesitation. Every person that Joe Biden brought into his cabinet, the Defense Department, State Department, whatever, they've all profited from war. They've all been on boards of weapons companies. They've been in these strategic consultant firms that do the business for the weapons companies. They have all profited from it, as well as too, other types of businesses. A lot of these folks that came in, both Jake Sullivan and Avril Haines, did a lot of work with data mining companies, right? The people that are going through all your information online and selling it to people, right? This surveillance, the way they profit off of surveillance, right?
Right.
So it is, and there is little thought about it. There is any thought that is publicly given to the loss of life is always just some type of theatrical genuflection for political purposes. The way that they say God bless America after everything. Well, they say like, they're going to say something about how the dignity of and sanctity of life, and but it's just what the speechwriter wrote. It's lip service, exactly. So you see that. And take the case of Afghanistan, where Joe Biden has said he's not going to honor the agreement that Donald Trump signed to have all U.S. troops out of Afghanistan by May 1st. Well, May 2nd, the Taliban is going to start killing Americans, which means on May 3rd or May 4th, some family is going to have some Army or Marine Corps officer or naval officer, Air Force officer, whatever, at their doorstep telling them their son or daughter is dead. And that doesn't affect any of these men and women. They're so far removed from it. They couldn't care. And they also too, the other thing about these men and women are they have, I just said this to Scott the other day. they have no philosophies. They have no worldviews. They have no ideologies. They may loosely fall into some kind of economic camp. They may loosely fall into some form, idea of what they believe government should or should not do. But any of that, they'll jettison in a heartbeat if it benefits them politically. What they are politicians, and whatever benefits them in the short term is what they are going to do.
I would kind of disagree with you. They do have a philosophy, and they do have an ideology, but it's all about the worshiping of power. That's
okay.
it. They're just they're interested in power and money, and that's it. They don't care about human life. They don't care about the country. They don't care about Joe Blow down the street. This is kind of a little bit off topic, but this was obviously evident last year whenever all these states locked down due to COVID, and trying to take the safe route, or however you want to see it. I didn't think it was a good idea to begin with, but in the occurrence that it was a necessary move to lock down these states and to shut down all these businesses, what did the politicians do? They took that initiative, they took that idea, that opportunity to print out trillions and trillions of dollars and give it to multinational corporations while you're living on peanuts, and you're soaking up, you're eating away at your savings, and your debt's just rising. And then they're like, oh, okay, we'll give you $1,200. Oh, okay, we'll give you $600. And you're talking like, not from in 9 months, the American people got $1,800. Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, while, Amazon and IBM and all these other companies are getting, trillions of dollars pumped into their coffers. And then they come out, a couple of days ago, and they're talking about, these passports, these vaccine passports run by IBM. And I'm looking at what you're talking about a while ago about the NSA and the data mining program. And I'm like, hell no. I don't want to give you that kind of access. It's an open secret that the Atlantic Council and the McChrystal Group work with Facebook to mine your data and sell it to the CIA. Like, I don't want any more of that information out there.
Yeah, and these, I think that's just a great point you bring up with the COVID about the way we handled these shutdowns. No idea about supporting the businesses that we were telling to shut down. Right. Nothing about, and there's no discussion about fundamentally changing how we handle our economy or how we handle our healthcare system. Look at how much money they're going to give. I think this latest COVID bill had $50 billion for COBRA payments. Right. Just money going directly to the health insurance industry. And it was some small, I think it comes out to, each of those COBRA payments is $47,000 for 6 months for each person. It's astounding how much money is just being pumped right into these massive corporations. And the small businesses are the ones who are suffering, no thought given to providing, basically like, hey, well, that'd be my solution. We're going to tell you have to close. Mm-hmm. So what did you make last year in your taxes? Okay, that's what we're going to give you, plus 3% or whatever for inflation. Right. No thought about that, right? No way of really helping people get through this, except for the opportunity to help their friends. It really, and the fact that it's very disheartening that it's allowed to go on, right? It's allowed to continue. It's these wars occur the same way. The kids in cages occur the same way. People are unemployed the same way, regardless of which administration is in power. Right. Which party's in power. It's just and people act like it somehow matters. Of course there are some issues that define each party, but when you look at it, my God, what did you had 80 million people vote for Biden and 74 million people vote for Trump? What were they really voting for? What was the differences they wanted somebody who wasn't going to use Twitter, basically, I think is what it comes down to.
It's what it seems like.
But it's all, it's all a facade. It's all a charade when it comes to that stuff, because it's all about who is the establishment. And I had plenty of problems with Trump. I'm basically a market anarchist, much like Scott is. So it's like I had plenty of issues with Trump, The one thing I can say that was good about Trump is he drove all the right people crazy. So
He did. I mean, that's true. I grew up outside New York City, and I've known Donald Trump for a long time. Haven't liked him for a very long time. Right. But yeah, no, there are definitely, I would be okay with like putting all those people together on an island and just let them drive each other crazy type of deal. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, there was, and some of his points, again, I'm not very much anti Donald Trump. However, there were critiques he made of the overall system, particularly when he was campaigning.
When he was talking about the Iraq war, especially
the Iraq war, or just the way the whole system works, that he is correct upon. And the fact that he characterized Washington, D.C. as a swamp is absolutely true. Now, he just kept the same people in there or brought people back from the past. I mean, he didn't do much to change that, but his characterization of it was correct.
Yeah. No, he diagnosed the problem perfectly. It's kind of like Karl Marx. He diagnosed the problem, but his solution sucked. So it's just one of those deals. But so yeah, but we look at how all this goes, and just it's just the same cronyism, the same corruption, the same corporatism. And though you and I, come from different economic standpoints and different economic backgrounds, we can look at it. We both looking at it the same thing, going, yeah, this is all a bunch of shit, man.
Yeah.
And and it's the same people. And this is a real problem, are all these people that so many people are so willing to, give all this power to. 81 million people voting for Joe Biden, willing to give him all this power. And like you said, it's the same cages. I had my buddy on the other day talking about the border crisis. He's a former border patrol agent, and he actually quit, as a conscientious objector. He was just like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this job. It doesn't feel right. It's against my morals. It's against my principles. So he quit. But he was telling me, he's like, yeah, it looks exactly the same as it did in 2012. He's like, there's nothing different. There's nothing different about it now than there was then. It's all the same stuff. So they're continuously just pumping the same money. And these are the people keep giving them power, and they continue to decimate not only foreign countries, but the domestic population at the same time. And people wonder why there's such a divide and why there's such turmoil in the country.
And where we see the change occurring in this country comes on the local level, right? You say the revision of our drug laws, right? New York State just legalized recreational marijuana and is going to expunge the records of those who had it and everything. More and more states, including conservative red states, are doing those kinds of things. You're not seeing that come down from the top. And that's why even though I'm on the left of things, I'm a libertarian socialist. I believe things go from the ground up. I worker control type of thing. I am equally distrustful of big government and big corporations. Anything big, I just inherently don't like. Anything more than 3 people, maybe I start to get a bad feeling about. Maybe, I don't know. But I also my own philosophy believe that we can work together. We can have resources that we can pool. And that's the problem, is that some of the things for our nation, because of the disparity of wealth, of wealth among states, we need to have a federal system in order to make sure that the entire nation is able to, go back to the 1930s and the electrification of rural America. You need to have, I believe, a government a federal government that's going to do something like that. However, you don't have that type of mentality, I believe, within any of the administrations of the last, 50, 60 years at least, that have had that willingness to do something for people if it's not going to benefit their friends, right? So you don't see these massive projects. Why don't we have, as someone, why hasn't one of the platforms of the Democratic Party been broadband Wi-Fi for everyone throughout the country? right? I mean, if you want to look at a program that would meet like the idea of government doing good, you know, of meeting a need for people, something that really helps people in their lives, right? I mean, if you don't have broadband internet, broadband Wi-Fi, you're really being left behind. Yep. Particularly now when your kids have to study from school at home and everything, right? You're really being left. So that's something that you would think that an organization like the Democratic Party would jump on, because that totally supposedly fits their ethos and their platform. But of course, they're not going to do that, because that's not going to make money for their friends. Right. You know, it's things like that, yeah, exactly. So what did these 81 million people vote for with Joe Biden? Again, I think most of them, it's just because they know Biden's not going to tweet dirty words or insult people. Although he's doing a fine job insulting the Russians for, you know, no good reason, which no one, you know, you look back, I just listened to an interview that Scott Horton did with Jack Matlock, the ambassador to the Soviet Union, our last ambassador to the Soviet Union. Matlock brings it up. Like, Reagan never insulted anybody. He never insulted anyone, you know, I mean, and here you got Biden, you know, so it really is. What did we, you know, what do people expect? And then, of course, the lack of holding them accountable. You know, again, like what your buddy was describing, and good for him. And please pass on my gratefulness to him for listening to his conscience and leaving that. But the problem is somebody else is going to step, like, as we were talking about earlier, someone else is going to step right into that spot, you know, and all the people that 4 years ago were upset about kids in cages, I don't really see that coming across on my Facebook thing anymore. I don't really see the demonstrations being planned, and you know, not with the fervor that it was 3 or 4 years ago. The people who are really committed to it are, of course, but you know, all the people who just wanted to blame Donald Trump for it, yeah, it shows a real issue with our principles and our values on the left. It really does.
Well, it's not just left. I mean, they do it on the right too. I mean, I'll watch it because I'm watching from the outside looking in, and I'm watching both sides. Just like, I'm like, oh, y'all are all a bunch of idiots. Y'all are all, yeah. Like, just, you know, it's almost like in communist Russia, and I think this is why people like to make the communism comparison. But in communist Russia, they replaced religion with the state, right? They replaced God with the state. And it really feels like the United States has done that, has made that transformation to where the state is the deity that is worshipped by at least the voting populace. And
I think so. I think if you go back and look at the fervor that was surrounded the election this past year, and hey, that's great. We got this level of turnout in democracy. I believe in democracy. I believe in democracy in the workplace, democracy in government, et cetera, et cetera. However, the fervor, where as if it was going to be the solution, that I think this was the Eucharist, right? That was going to deliver the salvation, was going and just pushing, you know, whatever, you're pushing the button on the machine now, clicking the button, whatever type of machine you have, or filling out the bubble on a piece of paper. Yeah, that was it. Like, I think you're right. That this was going to be some Deus ex machina, right? This is some God's going to come down and solve this by voting. Right. I think you're absolutely right, Tommy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you listen to some of the language that was used too. They had I think the Washington Monument. They had lights like shooting out over DC from the Washington Monument, and one of the pundits is like, it's like Biden embracing the country. And it's like, what the hell are you talking about? You know, like, you people are disgusting, you know? It was like the only time they ever gave Donald Trump any credit was when he bombed Syria.
Oh, you know, I know.
It's just like this worship of state power is disgusting to me.
And particularly through violence, right?
Yes.
That is the form of state power, is violence. So whether it be bombing people, whether it being cops shooting people, whether it being locking up 2.5 million people in this country, we've got the biggest prison population on the planet by far, right? I mean, that type of thing. That is what you worship. That is what is, and there's a very real current of that. And then I think that also is echoed through the partisanship too, that it then breaks down into that blue versus red, the Democrat versus. I went to go look at a house a few a couple months ago to purchase, and there's another man in there, and he felt the need to announce that he was a Republican with a capital R, right? In the middle of an open house, kind of like, but that's his religion.
Mhm.
That is his identity, right? And so
Right.
you get into these other issues too of personal identity, of what this means, and then of course it's something I touched on a podcast I recently put up. I don't know if you were able to hear about compassion or not, about what it means when we identify an enemy, what it means for us. Because by identifying an enemy, you are setting boundaries, you're setting definitions, and by that you are then defining yourself.
Mhm.
Right. So having a large D Democrat, large R Republican, and that's your identity. Well, yeah, then of course, anything that those 74 million people who voted for Trump, they're on the other side. They're completely opposite of me. They can't have anything good to say. They can't, and by no means, because by all means, because they are on the other side of me, because they are Republicans, then that means anything that my team does, the Democrats do, is by definition different than the Republicans. So that is how people can, not care that Biden has kids in cages when they were screaming bloody murder 2 years ago about Trump doing the same thing, because to them, it is an identity situation, and they're able to foster a dissonance between themselves and the Republicans or against the Democrats. And so, this is a real issue. And then of course our media is structured in a way that, I'm sure you've seen this, Tommy, the ratings loss that CNN has had since Donald Trump lost office. They're down something like 47% of their viewers or something like that.
I think it's every news station.
Yeah.
I think
I would believe it. Yeah.
I saw it was CNN was being talked about, and then Brian Stelter on CNN got all defensive. So he was writing about, I think, One American News losing a bunch of their viewership. I think Fox has lost a bunch of their viewership. And, I think all of them are way down. I mean, Trump, and I had said this whenever the election was coming around. I said, if Trump loses, we're going to see media go absolutely berserk, because they were on the downfall prior to his election. And I mean, I think I read about this in The Intercept in 2015, and then Trump kind of resuscitated them and gave them like a second wind. But I don't think it's going to be long at all where, podcasts like what I'm doing, what Scott's doing, are going to be what mainstream is, where people are getting their information from.
Oh yeah, I hope so. I mean, one of the things for me, of course, is that this is an issue with our education system, right? Our education system is not producing children or young adults who have been taught to think critically, right? So that's part of the problem, is that we have, because I would love to see that. I would love to see basically a media system that is localized, and of course you're going to have your people out there doing the international journalism and stuff like that. But, in terms of like a localized journalism that, used to exist in this country, local newspapers, then local radio stations, local television stations. But again, getting back to that, as opposed to what we have now, right, where 95% of the media in this country is owned by 5 corporations. And those 5 corporations are owned by the same 5 money management firms that own 95% of the S&P 500, right? I mean, so when you start looking at this, the same banks own pretty much all of industry. So that's a quick and easy way to understand why the media is so often not willing to report alternatively, not willing to talk about other establishment industries, not willing to discuss the wars, et cetera, because the same banks that own the media companies also own the weapons companies, also own the fossil fuel companies, et cetera, et cetera. Right. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that would be a wonderful thing, is if people were able to find good quality journalists, good quality thinkers via podcasts like, yourself, Scott, and I think that would, you have the danger, of course, of running into an echo chamber, but, that's occurring anyway. And that's occurring with really shitty journalism, right? That's occurring with MSNBC and Fox and CNN. You're getting really terrible journalism, or the New York Times or the Washington Post. It used to be, I grew up, Tommy, like being a nerd about all this stuff. And when I was like 11 or 12 years old, the greatest thing for me was to get a copy of the New York Times. And now it's like, yeah, they'll do some good work a lot of times. However, they've been bad on so many things. They've gotten so many things wrong. They've been, one thing after another. It certainly can't be considered the newspaper of record. And I don't think we'll ever have a newspaper of record ever again. And I think you're exactly right, man, that this idea that they are going to go berserk because their revenues are crashing. How are they going to get the clicks again? How are they going to get the likes again? How are they going to get people to watch their, it's a real problem for them. And what that can mean for us as a society is really bad, right? Because say they continue this, say they're just able to dominate. I don't know about you. Like, I used to watch a lot of my news on YouTube a few years ago, watch like different shows on YouTube, whatever. I
still watch Tim Pool, and
I would watch, like,
he does some pretty decent work, and Ford Fisher puts up a lot of live videos.
Ford's a great example. Ford does incredible work, and he's been basically kind of deplatformed by YouTube. Right. I mean, other times, maybe now I'll watch, like, say, I haven't watched in a while, but I'll watch like Crystal Ball and Zangar and Jetty on the Hill program, and what comes up a couple of years ago, you watch that and there'd be somebody else of that level, that caliber, like that type of alternative independent media, who, not that the Hill is independent, but like, you get what I'm talking about. Like, at least you've got two voices that are not well liked by either the Republican or Democratic Party. I would get a recommendation for somebody who was like them. Now, what I find on my YouTube feed is that as soon as I'm finished watching Crystal and Sangar, what comes up as recommended for me? Tucker Carlson, Rachel Maddow, right? You know what I mean? So, like, you can see where these algorithms are being controlled by establishment media, where in order to find a Tommy Salmons, you have to look for it very hard, right? It's not easy. Your show is not going to pop up unless people are specifically looking for your kind of
Usually
content.
not on YouTube.
Nothing
on YouTube. I think I get like 15 views every episode on YouTube because I don't post video, because I'm like, whatever. I do all my stuff at the Institute and through my Substack.
But that's an issue though, with, like, say, like, you're like you guys at the Libertarian Institute, which I'm sure you've had issues with this whole algorithm thing, where you're not showing up in the search results, and I certainly know that's the case for the guys on the left, whether it be places I write for like Counterpunch or Consortium News, whether it be journalists like Max Blumenthal or Aaron Mate. I mean, these are people who have been shunted out of the algorithm, so it's hard to find them. And
I've never read Counterpunch, but I can vouch for the other ones. I mean, Consortium and the Gray Zone. I really appreciate their work.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have things like you had
Matt Taibbi, Glenn Greenwald. They do some good work too.
And so now you're seeing a lot of those folks over on Substack.
Yep.
And then you're having, Matt Taibbi has been writing about this a lot, about how establishment journalism wants to censor that. You have people like Brian Seltzer on CNN saying how dangerous Substack is. Right. I mean, how it's right. I mean, like, it's absurd, and it's so overt, the reasons why they're saying it, because they're afraid of their bottom line. And it's particularly hypocritical when, you're talking about organizations that got so much wrong, whether it be about the wars, whether it be about the financial crises, whether it be about, literally anything. The whole issue with Russia over the last several years, every week, CNN or the New York Times or the Post, they were putting out, publishing things that were incorrect, that were lies. Again, I'm not a Donald Trump fan, far from it.
Right.
But the lies about him and Russia were obscene.
Right.
And this is something that occurs over and over again.
Well, and it came back on the left too. Like it didn't stop with Donald Trump. I mean, they started labeling Tulsi Gabbard,
that's right,
puppet,
that's right,
God apologist, and this. I mean, And
Yeah.
it was just like, yeah, anybody who stands up, like we were saying earlier, if you stand up against the establishment, like a Mike Flynn, or you're gonna get hammered, right?
That's exactly right. And you see it really on the Democratic Party is much quicker to hammer the left than it is the Republicans.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to look at, say, the Democratic Party platform. And what you have is you have a party that, and I shouldn't say the platform, but really its policies, what it has chosen to do, who Biden put into his government. They decided during the election that they were going to go for trying to swing a handful of Republicans while alienating their entire left, while alienating like basically a democratic socialist left, because they are much more concerned with their corporate donors than they are with their people on the left. And I think maybe I don't know the Republicans as well, but I have a feeling that you get that as well too with them, that they are much more concerned about keeping their corporate backers happy than they are about what. And that's how the Tea Party came about, right? It's really, yeah.
I just think that the subversive effort on the right has been a little bit more successful than it has been on the left. So through the subversion of the Republican Party, you did see the Tea Party pop up, which was something I kind of identified with back then. And then you saw Donald Trump, which, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but I mean, you had like National Review putting out an entire episode, its entire one month's magazine on National Review. Every article was one writer just demolishing Trump during the campaign. I mean, they did everything in their power to stop Trump from being the candidate in 2016. So you did see that on the right. It was just Trump was actually successful.
Oh, he was incredibly successful, right? I mean, how many people did he beat in the primary, right? And then he
17, I think it was,
something like that. Yeah. And then he beat Hillary Clinton, who, who was supposedly be, a shoo-in or whatever. Yeah.
And that's one thing. That's one thing Dave Smith always says. He says, if there's anything good about Donald Trump, is he took down the Bushes and the Clintons.
That's true.
If nothing else, like, we have to thank him for that.
That is absolutely true in that sense, and it's kind of like, you saw the same on the left with Sanders. One of the things you're listening, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
We're getting close to get off here. We're getting close to dinner time. That's why,
I got to get off here in a second anyway.
The panic is starting. But, you hear some people on the left, and I think Matt Taibbi talks about this. Maybe Crystal Ball does as well. This idea that what really upset the Democratic Party about Sanders was that Sanders showed that he could run a campaign based on $27 donations. Right. Sanders showed that the corporate backing is not necessary to do, and that scared the hell out of the Democrats. Right. Scared the hell out of the DNC, the DCCC, the DSCC, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I mean, that's a very real thing. So you do. I mean, I think there is, I think what we're getting to here is while, Trump was a nightmare for many reasons. I mean, I'm a Sanders guy, but I can understand how people on the right would say Sanders would be a nightmare. I get that, but the hope is that, okay, we've had some people do very well against this Democratic Republican monolith. And that's why a lot of us on the left were disappointed that Sanders didn't leave the Democratic Party. Right. A lot of us were disappointed in that, but I really felt like, especially in 2016, whenever he came out after everything that was done to him, and he came out and he endorsed Hillary Clinton, I was like, man, you just slapped every one of your supporters in the face. I know. Exactly.
I was like, that's just, I was actually shocked he got as much attention or as much momentum in 2020 because of the way he had acted at the end of that in 2016.
And it showed, I think, a lot. It really showed when it came to Super Tuesday last year, about a year ago, right? Where that's where he lost it with Super Tuesday, and everyone was expecting him to continue that momentum. And I know, like in my case here in North Carolina, after exactly what you just said, Tommy, about how he handled 2016, Yeah. I might throw him a few dollars. I'm going to vote for him in the primary, because we have an open primary here and everything. So I can vote, but I'm not doing anything more than that.
I'm not excited about it. Yeah.
I'm not excited about it. I mean, because if he rolled over like that after 2016, that just shows the fact that he didn't burn the DNC headquarters to the ground when everything came out about how he had been basically screwed over, how he had been cheated out of an election. He just accepted it. And then again, the same thing too in 2020, just went along with it, endorses Biden. Yeah. And here we are, kids in cages, people being killed in the Middle East, right? As you said, our economics different, but we both can agree that the putting $6 trillion into the stock and bond market, or however much it's been, is not good. Right? I mean, right? Yeah.
The amount of printing is not good either.
It's not good. Yeah. I've got, I'd love to talk to you more about that kind of stuff. So I do believe in some of the modern money management theory stuff, but it has to be done for a specific reason and a purpose other than making sure that certain people are getting, a third beach home or whatever is happening out of this. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that's a good place to stop. We will definitely do this again, and we'll get into some of these economic discussions and kind of the way we view economics. And I'm gonna see if I can get this monkey off my back. Come back over here, dude. Come back over here. My mixer's still plugged up.
Man, that's why I'm in an office chair. If I try to do this on my couch or anything like that where they could get up, forget it. I'd be the same way. They'd be all on top of me. Yeah.
Before I got this mixer, before I started carrying the mixer with me in the truck, I would do it up front in the front seat, and I would set my computer on the dashboard, but I don't have enough room for the mixer and the computer and be able to reach all the plugs everywhere I need them to reach. So I don't have a choice. I can either put the mixer on the floor and have him jump on it every time he jumps out of his chair, or I can come sit back here in the bed and I can let him waller on me. Yeah. So,
all right, man, I'll let you get going. Hey, if you ever come through North Carolina, let me know.
I absolutely will, man. I haven't been up there in a long time.
Said you're just a slave. All your good intentions took you to your grave. Your pride is how they killed you. With the flag you wave just like a fool. They promised you a mountain, gifted you a stone. They demanded that you throw it into your neighbor's home, and then seize all that they worked for and give it to the throne just like a tool. Well, as we all just stand in line and glorify new ways of being cruel, it seems to me humanity is not something that they're teaching us in school. They dumbed us down all around, propaganda, their pollution. They set a cage up on the stage, a facade for all solution. They build a wall, block them all from this mental institution. It's insane. Now they're writing their own rule books and they're crossing all their T's. They're fashioning their people to all wear beggars' knees. If you want a clean drink of water, well, you must say pretty please. It's all a game. As we all just stand in line and justify these crimes done in our names, it seems to me authority and tyranny are both one and the same. Change the channel, it's time to set things right. Make them all rot with fear in their beds at night. Devour all their worthless souls and sacrificial right, just like we should. 'Cause blame, and we'll stack them up like cordwood, watch them sizzle on the flames for good. Well, as we all just stand in line waiting for some kind of Robin Hood, our liberty will never be until our right to freedom is understood.